Severini loved the idea of the cleansing power of war. He loves the idea that war somehow eliminates those historical artifacts that hold us back and eliminates those members of society that aren't, well, as he would see it, necessary. This is going to be a bit ironic later on, but we'll get to that. So he creates Armored Train. Now, this encapsulates the futurist program. Here we see a high-tech armored train. And let me remind you that armored trains are kind of the big, fancy new toy that each of these nations has. These are huge. We see big cannons and everything else. Basically, armored trains, the idea behind them is I'm going to put giant guns on it and lots of troops with machine guns and other things. I'm going to run it right through the enemy nation and obliterate everything in its path. Of course, there's a little shortcoming to this plan, which is, of course, in a time of war, the first thing you do is blow up the railroad connections to the nation that's going to run an armored train through. But either way, leading up to World War I, this is the thing that they show off. People crowd around and want to see the brand new technology in armored trains. And so that's why Severini is going to use it as the basis for his painting. So here we see death and destruction omitted, and colors are bright to focus on the cleansing effect of war, as if they're firing daisies into the countryside, cleansing it of all those dirty things like people and buildings. They might as well be firing Tide Pods for all it's worth. But this captures the dynamicism and motion central to futurism. All of the objects here are broken into facets, very much from the Cubist influence. And as we look at it, you'll notice the color schemes. They're firing bright blues and primary and secondary colors into the landscape. Nothing here seems dangerous. Nothing here seems, to indicate massacre. There we would expect tones of red and black and gray, but we're not seeing any of that. Each of the figures is broken into Cubist facets, the uniforms primarily being broken up. The rifles, of course, we see an indication of them, but they're just sort of an indication. We know that they're there. We know that they're rifles. He doesn't need to show us. The turrets of the guns, of course, are in the Cubist form, where we're seeing different sides at the same time. For example, this opening in the turret needs to be seen from the front. That's the most interesting and identifiable pose they can take. But the barrel is seen from the side. Of course, if you look down the barrel of a gun, it's kind of boring. It's like a big metal donut firing freedom seeds into the distance. At least that's what I imagine the futurists would be saying. The colors, the forms all get across this very positive aspect of war, one that we don't typically think of when we think of war. And we're going to see a very polar opposite to this when we get to German New Objectivity, which will happen after the war. Now, ironically, or somewhat obviously, I guess, futurism will break up as World War I progresses, since many of the artists will feel drawn to combat and die as part of the cleansing effect of war that you would expect, although futurism will be attached to Mussolini and fascism after the war, those that continue, such as Bocchini. And consequently, we see futurism being associated with fascism, and so futurism really falls out of style. It's why it's skipped over so often in art history.